my name is Nicole.
My name is Calista.
And my name is Anthony.
Today we are going to talk about the Zapatista indigenous women and their participation in the EZLN, or the Zapatista Army of National Liberation.
3 subtopics we're going to cover include the history of the EZLN, the impact of the Zapatista women's participation and their role, and modern-day EZLN and what it does.
We are going to start with the history of the EZLN.
The Zapatista Army of National Liberation, or in Spanish, the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, formed on November 17, 1983, named after the early 20th century peasant revolutionary called Emiliano Zapata. Emiliano Zapata and his men had opposed Porfirio Díaz's dictatorship and were instead in support of Francisco Madero. Their guerrilla army marched to the city of Cuautla and closed the entrance to Mexico City, and Díaz resigned a week after. Zapata was about to disarm his men until the new provisional president sent an army on the guerrillas.
Madero was later elected president in late 1911, but Zapata deemed him as incapable of meeting the revolution's demand through the Plan of Ayala. The revolution was then renewed, and they agreed to appoint a new provisional president until elections. Stolen land would be returned by expropriating, including payment, a third of the area of the haciendas. However, the haciendas rejected this plan because they would not be paid for losing their land.
Through his campaigns, Zapata shared the land from the haciendas and would order executions and expropriations, sometimes not under the laws of war. But he was generally a good person with strong ideals he wanted to implement in society.
Back to the Zapatistas movement, the group did not attract much of their followers and members until the early 1990s, although it had been founded in the early 1980s. Most of the Zapatistas were indigenous peoples from Chiapas and recognized themselves as the indigenous peasant movement. Their base resided in the Lancadan rainforest of the eastern Chiapas state. They wanted the Indians in Mexico to go against the one-party rule of the PRI, or the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or in English, the Institutional Revolutionary Party. However, their principal goals were the reform and redistribution of land in the area, while demanding better cultural and political autonomy for the indigenous people in Chiapas.
At the time, the Mexican government was trying to prepare Mexico to integrate into the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which would link the United States and Canada to Mexico in a free trade pact. Because of this integration, the government introduced a few economic reforms to prepare. One of the land reform bills in 1993 was made to privatize the country's ejidos, or in English, communal farms. The EZLN argued that the North American Free Trade Agreement and this new land reform would only make the Indians even poorer.
So on January 1st, 1994, when NAFTA was implemented, the EZLN marched into 4 Chiapas towns, seizing them and urging the Indians to join the rebellion. Rafael Guillén Vicente was the leader of the movement, and his rebels fought with Mexican troops for around 11 days. Hundreds of people died in these battles as the revolt spread to other parts of Chiapas. The states of Veracruz, Oaxaca, Guerrero, and Puebla also experienced these uprisings. As the violence ensued, several indigenous peoples sided with the EZLN, as many pro-Zapatista municipalities affirmed that they were free from the state government.
The president in 1994, Carlos Salinas de Gortari, began to negotiate with the EZLN, but it hadn't been resolved by Ernesto Zedillo's presidency in late 1994. And in early 1995, President Zedillo issued arrest warrants for Rafael Guillén Vicente and other respected leaders in the movement. However, his actions were not met with popularity from society, and Zedillo ended up resuming negotiations with the EZLN in 1996. The Zapatistas' demands and interests were met in the San Andres Accords. This declared that the Mexican government would treat the indigenous peoples in Chiapas fairly and also outlined indigenous autonomy and land reform. But in December 1996, Zedillo refused to accept the accords.
The government kept fighting the rebellion and often attacked civilians since they supported the rebels. A while later, autonomy was finally given to indigenous communities and they could participate and vote in politics. Without the EZLN's uprising, the indigenous peoples in Mexico would not have as much respect and rights they have now.
But quickly, the violence shifted towards peaceful political action. The Zapatistas had controlled villages and implemented administrative structures, creating caracoles, meaning snail shells in English. Caracoles were seats of government and each represented Zapatista-held municipalities.
Now we are going to cover the role of Zapatista indigenous women in the EZLN and how they impacted the movement.
Women in Mexico have been oppressed by the regulations of the Mexican government for centuries. However, women in the EZLN were those that refused to stay in the confines of their homes and wanted to strengthen and transform their communities into a place that welcomed and celebrated their contributions. Joining the EZLN helped them do that, and when they joined, the structure and aspirations of the movement itself changed. Don't Abandon Us is the desperate cry of the women of the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, hoping that their cry would be heard and wouldn't die, both within and beyond their communities. The EZLN helped them rise above their conditions of oppression and poverty and attain a voice that those in a position of power never let them have.
Roughly 1/3 of the EZLN was composed of women, with a significant number of them holding commanding offices. About 1/2 of the EZLN support base was women. 2 women in particular, Comandante Ramona and Major Ana Maria, held great influence within the EZLN and encouraged other women to join the Zapatistas. Prior to joining the EZLN, Comandante Ramona lived in poverty, earning a meager wage selling artisan crafts in the city she was born, Chiapas, Mexico. The impoverished state of her community is what pushed her to join the movement, and soon she rose to be one of the most influential participants in the EZLN. During her time as a member, she led alongside Major Ana Maria for control of the city of San Cristobal de las Casas, the former capital of Chiapas, during the 1994 Zapatista uprising. In 1996, she traveled to Mexico City and helped establish the National Indigenous Congress. In doing so, she was the first EZLN member to be granted the ability by the Mexican government to travel outside of Chiapas for a 3-day conference to give a series of peace talks for the NIC, in which her famous cry, "Never a Mexico without us," came to be a slogan still used by the NIC today. Her calm and peaceful demeanor, alongside her determination to fight for her community and the women within it, meant that she quickly became a symbol of equality for those that encountered her and supported the aspirations of the movement.
Major Ana Maria held a similar power, leading alongside Comandante Ramona during the 1994 Zapatista uprising and the seizing of San Cristobal de las Casas and helping create the Women's Revolutionary Law, which was a set of 10 laws that granted rights to women regarding marriage, children, work, health, education, political and military participation, and protected women from violence. She joined the EZLN when she was 14, and later came to claim that she joined because she understood the importance of owning land, especially as an indigenous woman, and previously this was unheard of. Her main demands of the EZLN movement were democracy and liberty. Apart from holding the highest military ranking in her area, Major Ana Maria is also known for her creation of women-only groups in the movement, called compañeras, and her involvement in a series of peace talks, peaceful protests, and marches. For example, in 2011, Major Ana Maria joined La Marcha por el Color de la Tierra, the March for the Color of the Earth, whose aim was to defend the San Andrés Accords, which committed the Mexican government to recognize indigenous rights and autonomy in the Constitution.
In an interview with both Comandante Ramona and Major Ana Maria, they gave insight to the roles women had in the EZLN. There was a portion of women, like Major Ana Maria, that joined and chose to take up arms. Women in towns began to teach their sisters, daughters, nieces that it's better to take a gun, it's better to fight, because otherwise nothing women were asking for would ever get achieved with the peaceful ways it was asked for in the past. Those that chose to join as insurgents had to renounce having a family of their own because it was too difficult to care for children in the conditions that they lived in. There was family planning for women insurgents, but for those who did get pregnant, they either went home or left the child with their parents.
Additionally, Comandante Ramona and Major Ana Maria also spoke of the way that women who stayed in the communities played their role, such as by warning communities if the military arrived, operating radios to notify communities of federal troop movement, sewing uniforms, feeding troops, and helping make pieces for guns and also small bombs. Surprisingly, these activities were not gendered. Men participants of the EZLN also contributed towards these more domestic tasks. Major Ana Maria explained, "In the EZLN, everything is done equally. Here, no differences exist. One day, it's the men's turn to cook. The following day, it's the women's, and the next, both. If clothes need to be washed, a man can also do it." In the insurgent camps, men and women also shared cooking and cleaning tasks equally.
In the interview, Comandante Ramona and Major Ana Maria also made it a point that joining the EZLN allowed women greater access to educational opportunities. They learned to read and write, they learned how to speak Spanish, and they learned how to use different kinds of machinery they never would have encountered had they not joined the movement. Combat tactics and political theory were also taught. As can be seen, women held significant influence in the EZLN, both on the front lines and behind the scenes. Those that joined acquired an autonomy and knowledge that they would never have access to otherwise.
Lastly, we are going to talk about the EZLN in the present day. Within the last few years, the Zapatista army has lessened their involvement in political groups and fights in Mexico. Though their fights nowadays are not as groundbreaking as those of the 1990s, they continue to stand strong to this very day, fighting for all to have a voice and a say in the world, to be equally represented in all aspects of life. A few notable events within this recent decade stand out in particular.
On December 12, 2012, over 40,000 Zapatistas and Zapatista supporters rallied together after having risen 18 years prior to march in silence through 5 cities: Altamirano, San Cristobal, Ocosingo, Palenque, and Las Margaritas. All marched in support of the power the EZLN represented, making it their largest uprising yet. Spectators of the event claimed that they appeared and disappeared without a trace, letting the public know, here we are.
In 2016, the EZLN broke their 20-year-long agreement. Despite claiming that they would never involve themselves in Mexican electoral politics, they announced that they would publicly endorse and represent a candidate for the 2018 election. It was announced at the National Indigenous Congress that they would support María de Jesús Patricio Martínez in her political journey to become president of Mexico.
Maria was a woman of both indigenous and Mexican descent. The EZLN believed that it was time for new leadership in Mexico, and they fully supported indigenous women in politics to help the people of Mexico. After all, the EZLN's beliefs have always aligned with giving everyone a voice and creating change in the world. Though she never received enough signatures to be part of the 2018 Mexican election, her supporters and the Zapatistas still believe that their fight would carry on. We are going to keep moving forward.
In 2019, the EZLN announced that they would be expanding their organization, specifically creating 11 new organizational centers across the country. This way, they hope to open themselves up to the world again, creating new centers that will make it easier to gain access to their help and resources. By providing new outreach centers, they're able to help more people than ever before.
Recently, the EZLN has also looked to expand internationally, with one of their most recent projects just this year. The project includes 7 indigenous Zapatistas, 4 women, 2 men, and a non-binary person who traveled by boat to Europe in hopes of helping individuals in other countries. This group went on to be named the 421st Squad, named after the 201st Fighter Squad, a Mexican air combat unit that was a part of World War II.
Despite going through the COVID-19 pandemic, they stood strong and continued their journey to the many European countries in an effort to form bonds with international forces and hopefully create solidarity between said countries. This group's goals were also to empower indigenous women and condemn colonialism, while simultaneously attempting to remove the transphobic and homophobic culture that Christianity imposed on indigenous peoples.
This Zapatista journey is a form of internationalism that will hopefully bring oppressed communities and established countries together to form global alliances that can directly help those that need it most. After all, international bonds like this are especially important in the midst of a global crisis.
Until this very day, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation continues to fight for all, consistently providing outreach to those in Mexico and around the world that need it most. They continue to combat oppression, hate, and discrimination in hopes of creating a world for everyone.
We hope that this episode has given you more insight on the Zapatista Army of National Liberation and the way that women played a significant role in its upbringing and expansion.
By participating both as armed insurgents and civil supporters, women helped the EZLN achieve its political goals while simultaneously obtaining a voice for the women in Mexico that needed it most.
Thank you for listening.